Hi, my name is Kathy Church. I'm a programming coordinator with the Wildlife Resources Division, and I'm stationed at Smithgall Woods. But today I thought that we would step outside of the discovery room for our topic, which is plants. But now, a lot of people ask me, hey Miss Kathy, how do you actually know all of these plants? Well, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I don't. That's the key. I don't know all of these plants. There are almost 320,000 different species or kinds of plants in the world. Not just Georgia, but in the world. If I were to try to learn 320,000 types of plants, I would have to spend my whole entire life just studying plants. Now, there are people that do that. The study of plants is called botany, and the people that study them are called botanists. I am not a botanist though. I'm just a novice. So when I pack my bag and I go out hiking, then I like to look for things maybe that I just find interesting, or maybe it's something I just don't know what it is, and I like to try to find out what plant that is. Now there's different ways that I can do that. I can do like we want to do all the time, pull out my phone and just Google it. There's just one small problem. If you live in Northeast Georgia where we are, then you know that most of the time you are not going to have internet service when you're out on a hike. And Google requires internet, so it's not going to work. You can also use plant apps. There are a lot of plant identification apps that you can use, but again, those guys are internet based. So if you don't have any internet, you don't have a plant app. Plus, a lot of those plant apps, they're not 100% reliable yet. So it's really not your best choice. They're getting better these days, but they're not great. So your best choice is what we call a dichotomous key. Now I know that that sounds like a tough word, but really it's not. Di means two. So when you say dichotomous, what you're actually saying is divided into two parts. So a dichotomous key is just a way of asking questions to find out something you don't know. So it may ask you a question like, does the plant have thorns? If yes, go to number 2. If no, go to number 5. With a series of questions like this over and over again, you finally end up with one answer, and that's your plant. But if you're going to pick a dichotomous key, there are a few things that you need to remember. First, you need to remember to get a key for your plant. Are you looking at mosses? Are you looking at grasses? Are you looking at shrubs? Are you looking at trees? What kind of plant are you trying to figure out? You want to make sure that your key is for that plant. Secondly, make sure you have a key for your region. 320,000 different species in one key would be enormous. There's no way you could use that key. So you want a key for your region. Even North America is still pretty big. If you can, you want a key for Georgia, even better for Northeast Georgia, the Appalachians, that would be great. That tells you it's really specific. So you need a key for your plant, you need a key for your region, and you need a key for your season. You either have a winter key or a summer key, because in the winter, a lot of plants, like these big oak trees behind me, those guys will actually lose their leaves in the winter. It's called being deciduous. So they drop their leaves in the winter to save energy. That means you can't use leaves to identify that plant. So a winter key identifies that plants by other things like stems and that type of stuff instead of using the leaves. A summer key, like we would use now, uses the leaves to help us identify it. So you need a key for your plant, a key for your region, and a key for your season. And the only real tough thing about a dichotomous key is the terminology. If you know the terminology, you're good to go. Now I have some personal favorites. When I go out, I like to keep with me these guys. I definitely like to carry forest plants of the southeast and their wildlife uses, because that not only tells me what plant it is, but who eats it, which is fabulous. I also like to carry a field guide to the trees and shrubs of the southern Appalachians. Now notice how specific that is. Southern Appalachians. So these are the guys that are found right here. But this one is super specific. This is Smithgall Woods State Park common flowers. So these have actually been found and the pictures taken in the park. So the cool thing is if I'm out in the park and I go, oh, what is that? I don't know. Oh, I can actually flip through, find a picture of it, and I know exactly what it is because that guide is super specific. So the more specific, the better. And you can see my guys are, they're a little worse for the wear. They travel around with me a lot. I love it. But knowing the terminology is what's important. So to know the terminology, then we have to understand what it means to be a plant. Plants are organisms in a big old group called Kingdom Plantae. Now that includes all 320,000 species. So since the Kingdom Plantae is huge, then it's got to have some rules, and we got to break it down into smaller bits. The rules, they're pretty simple. rule number one, plants have to be multicellular. Now, again, not a fancy word. Multi just means many, many cells. Cells are just building blocks. So that means it can't be one cell, it's got to be a whole bunch of cells. We, as animals, are also multicellular. So we have lots and lots of cells. So rule number one, you got to be multicellular. Rule number two is different from us though. Rule number two says that your cells must be made of cellulose. Now, cellulose in the cell wall of a plant is a tough material that acts like a strong skeleton for that plant so that it can grow without having to have bones like we do. So we have bones to help us grow big. Plants have cellulose in their cell wall. That's what helps them grow big. But lastly, you have to be an autotroph. Now, autotroph sounds like a fancy word, but it's not. It just means automatic food. So plants don't have to hunt for their food. They make their own food. And they make their food through photosynthesis. So they use this absolutely beautiful sunlight along with the nutrients and the water that they pull from the ground and the carbon dioxide that we put out. And they take all of that together in photosynthesis, which just means light making. They use the light energy from the sun to make their food. The food they make is a sugar called glucose. Now, what's important to us is when we eat plants, that glucose that they made is the food that we use. We then breathe out the carbon dioxide, they use that to make more food, and so on and so forth. But if those are the only three rules, multicellular, cells made of cellulose, and they got to photosynthesize, that's still huge. That's 320,000 different plants. So we take the kingdom plants and we break it into smaller groups. The first break is made by what scientists saw in reproduction. How do plants make new plants? Well, what we found is there are two general ways that plants make new plants. They're either what we call spore makers or seed makers. If you're a spore maker, then you're going to be pretty simple. But spores have to have water to survive and thrive and make new plants. So your spore makers are going to be found near water. But this is still about 20,000 of those 320,000 plants. So we got to break this group down a little bit more. So what we found are there's some spore makers that are pretty simple and some spore makers that are more complex. So we decided to actually break it up as to whether or not they had complex organisms or complex systems like roots. So when we break up our spore makers, we break up into the guys that don't have roots and the guys that do have roots. Well, a root's whole job is to take nutrients and water from far away and pull it into the plant and then deliver it all the way up into those leaves, however far away they are. So if you don't have roots, this means two really important things. You can't pull water and food from far away, so you're going to have to be near water or even in it possibly. And you can't actually push those nutrients and water up through the body of the plant, so you're not going to be able to grow tall. So a great example of a spore maker that doesn't have roots is the moss right here at my feet. Mosses, liverworts, and hornworts are all spore makers that have no roots. And since they have no vascular system, and vascular system just means like veins in our body, tubes that can carry things back and forth, like it carries our blood, it carries their food. So since they have no vascular system, we call them non-vascular plants. So non-vascular plants like moss are going to be short and they're going to be found near water. But there are some spore makers that are vascular. They do have roots and they do have a system to carry it out. So that means that they're going to grow taller, but those spores have still got to have water, so they're going to be found near water. A great example of a spore maker that has roots, a vascular spore maker, is a fern. A fern can grow pretty tall, but he's going to have to stay near that water for the spores. So this is a great thing to remember if you're out in the woods and you're wondering where your water is. I need to get water. Where's the water? Look for the ferns, because the ferns are always going to be growing where there's some water, somewhere close by. So those are our spore makers, either without roots, like the mosses, the liverworts, and the hornworts, or with roots, like the ferns. But again, only about 20,000 of the 320,000. All 300,000 others are seed makers. And seed makers include every plant that you have ever seen, every fruit, every berry, every vegetable, anything, flower that you've seen in your life, they're in the seed makers. So we got to break that huge group down again. So we break the seed makers down into the guys that don't make flowers and the guys that do make flowers. So if they don't make flowers, they're called a gymnosperm. And a great example of a gymnosperm is this big, tall pine tree right here behind me. Instead of making a flower, what a pine tree makes is a cone. But now, check out this cone. My gosh, that's an enormous cone. You're not going to find a cone this big around here. This is actually a longleaf pine cone, but this is a great example because most people don't think of pine trees as making seeds. If you were to actually open up a Virginia pine or a white pine or a yellow pine cone, then down inside here you would find the seeds. So when this guy's hanging up in the tree and the weather's right and the time of year is right, it will actually open up and drop those seeds out of there. And animals like squirrels love to get up in there and eat those seeds out of there. So if they're a seed maker but they don't make flowers, they're called a gymnosperm. If they're a seed maker that does make flowers, which means every flower you've ever seen in your life is in this group. That includes the azaleas, the graybeard behind me, even my favorite flower, which is the daffodil. These guys are all in the other group called angiosperms. And angiosperms are just plants that make flowers. Now I know that sometimes this can get confusing, but there's an easy way to remember it. Just remember, Jim doesn't like flowers, but Angie does. So gymnosperms don't make flowers, but angiosperms do. So just keep in mind, if you're out in the woods and you think, what plant is that? Remember, pull out your dichotomous key, start in the right place, and work your way through. Think as you go through, does it have spores or does it have seeds? Does it have roots or does it not have roots? Does it make cones or does it make flowers? That's what helps us make up our mind. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit about plants that you may not have known. Feel free to like us on Facebook, and if you need more information, go to our webpage at gastatepark.org/Smithgall Woods. Have a great day.